What if I told you a mill once stood in Connecticut that ground more than just wheat, and that its grinding never stopped because it wasn't allowed to? Listen closely. You were never meant to hear this story. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what you're about to learn will haunt you, no matter how far you are from Copper Creek. The Hartwell brothers built their empire on blood. Not metaphorically, literally. The grinding stones at their mill turned day and night even when no grain passed through, and in 1854, as 37 souls vanished without explanation, those stones kept turning, producing a strange pale dust, a dust too fine, too bone-white to be wheat. You see, Millbrook, Connecticut, wasn't just another New England village. It was a place that buried secrets beneath white church steeples and apple trees, a place that feared what it could not name, and the mill, built where the Mohegan people refused to tread, became the heart of that fear. Generations of townsfolk ignored what they sensed in their bones, that the Hartwell mill didn't just feed the county. It fed on it. Josiah Hartwell was a giant of a man with eyes like river slate, cold, weightless, and deep. He spoke rarely, but when he did, it was with a precision that made men uncomfortable. His brother, Elias, never stopped moving, mechanical, twitching, possessed by the rhythms of the mill as if it whispered directly into his mind. Neither brother ever married. They lived like shadows in the house overlooking the creek, rarely seen, never heard past dark. And yet they controlled everything, the farmers, the markets, the town's breath itself. Flour from their mill reached New York, Providence, Boston. Their product was unmatched, fine, white, always abundant even in lean years, especially in lean years. By the time local peddlers, travelers, and courting couples began to vanish, the town was already in a state of quiet hypnosis, too dependent on the Hartwells to question, too afraid to look closely. But something changed that fall. A boy, a fog, a glimpse into something not meant for human eyes. And that's when the truth began grinding its way to the surface. Because what's buried under a mill that never stops, never stays buried for long. Now ask yourself, why did the grinding never stop? Keep watching. This is only the first crack in the stone. There are things beneath the surface of old towns that were never meant to see daylight. Foundations laid not with brick, but with silence and fear. Millbrook was built on both. The townspeople spoke often of progress, railroads, schools, better harvests, but they never spoke of what pulsed beneath their pride, a sickness hidden behind tradition and trade, and nothing embodied that sickness more than the Hartwell mill. 4 stories tall, a fortress of weathered wood and stone, it stood where the river bent sharply into shadow. The grinding stones inside were legendary. French burrstone, sharp as razors, expensive beyond reason. But what truly made them infamous was what they hid. In the autumn of 1854, as the leaves turned red and gold, so too did the whispers begin to change. Not just gossip this time, something heavier. A peddler's wagon found dusted with powder too white for cornmeal, a hat discovered near the mill tail race, no man attached, and always that dust. Always that dust. Josiah never flinched when confronted. He offered explanations as smooth and cold as river stones. Elias stayed silent, hunched over his machines, those darting eyes watching everything, recording everything. They never seemed surprised when people asked questions. That was the most disturbing part. Constable Rufus Baldwin saw the pattern first. Each missing soul had passed near the mill. Each trail led back to Copper Creek. But there were no screams, no blood, no evidence of violence, just absence. And that smell. Scent like ground wheat mixed with something metallic, something wrong. He visited the mill in daylight, walked its halls, touched the stones. Josiah allowed it, too easily, as if daring him to find something. And when Baldwin asked why the stones were grinding empty, Elias gave him a look that made his skin crawl. "Got to keep them sharp," he said. "Got to keep them hungry." Hungry. What gristmill feeds on hunger? That night, Baldwin returned to the hill overlooking the mill. Fog blanketed the valley, the moon was high, and in that silence, he watched 3 unmarked wagons arrive under cover of darkness, each heavy with cargo, each leaving empty. No one ever saw those drivers again. The town still pretended nothing was wrong, but something inside the constable broke that night because he realized the truth. The Hartwell mill didn't process grain anymore, it processed people, and it had been doing it for a very, very long time. The grinding didn't stop, not for weather, not for Sabbath, not even when there was no grain left to mill. That was the first truth Baldwin couldn't ignore. The second came with a sound so faint, so unnatural, that it changed the way he heard silence forever. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning when he saw it. A final wagon approaching the Hartwell mill. No lanterns, no driver visible, just 2 draft horses moving like they'd done it 100 times. The canvas covering the load was taut, too taut, as if it were hiding not just shape, but weight, breath. And when the doors of the mill opened, the glow inside was red, not fire, something colder, something artificial. Baldwin watched in disbelief as Elias stepped into the lamplight, his face pale with flour or ash, his eyes glassy like a doll's. He raised his hand. The horses stopped without command. Josiah emerged next, slower, more deliberate. Between them they pulled the canvas free, and Baldwin swears, until the day he died, that something moved under that cloth, struggled, twitched. He heard it. A low moan swallowed by the rush of the creek and the endless grinding stones. That's when he knew they weren't just disposing of the dead, they were feeding the living. Hit that subscribe button and comment twice below with the phrase, "I see the dust." Lock it in. That phrase is your key to everything that comes next, and trust me, you need it. By dawn, the fog had thinned and Baldwin descended the hill with a purpose that frightened even him. The next morning he spoke to Samuel Phelps, the blacksmith, and told him everything. Phelps didn't blink. He only locked his doors and sent his son straight to Hartford for the sheriff. What happened next was fast and surgical. 20 men, armed, surrounding the mill just as Josiah emerged in his Thursday boots, ledger in hand. He didn't resist. He didn't blink. He simply asked, "Do you have a body?" Sheriff Wadsworth did not answer. He ordered the grinding to stop. Elias refused, whispered, "Stones must feed." And that's when they made the worst mistake of all. They lifted the runner stone, and what they found underneath was no longer dust. It was bone, tooth, cloth, rings, watches, memories crushed into powder. The Hartwells didn't deny it. They just stood silently, as if they were waiting for the stones to start again. You could smell it before you saw it. Under the runner stone was no grain, no chaff, just the soft grey crumble of lives forgotten. Human remains ground so fine that only teeth and silver buttons told their story, but no one screamed. No one wept. The men stood frozen, locked in a horror so complete it felt ancient, as if they had simply uncovered a truth that had always been there, waiting. Sheriff Wadsworth, a man known for hard justice, couldn't speak for nearly a full minute. Then he gave the order to seize the Hartwells. Josiah didn't move. Elias smiled. And then, somehow, the stones began to turn again. There was no one operating the mill. No one touched the crank or water gate, but the grinding resumed, low at first, then louder, rhythmic like breathing. The men backed away, weapons raised, but Elias only stepped closer to the mechanism and whispered, "They remember." In that instant, 3 of the men dropped their rifles and bolted into the trees. One later shot himself in his barn. Another wouldn't speak again, ever. Only one remained sane enough to write what he saw, and his journal would become the only surviving record of what happened inside Hartwell Mill that day. Because what followed never made the papers. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because we're not done with this horror, and what's coming might live closer to you than you think. Josiah and Elias were taken into custody, briefly, but something shifted in Millbrook. The sheriff's wife suffered a stroke 2 nights later. The blacksmith's child disappeared from his bed. Animals were found mutilated. Windows bled with what looked like flour and rust. The townspeople begged to destroy the mill, but the council refused. Too much history, too much pride, too many secrets. Instead, they sealed the doors with iron, burned the ledgers, and buried the runner stone beneath the church on Shepherd's Hill, a mistake that would echo for decades. Because not long after, Grinding sounds were heard beneath the pews, and in the graveyard behind the chapel the soil never stayed still. The Hartwells? Vanished en route to Hartford. No bodies, no escape, just two chains lying open in the back of a prison wagon found turned on its side, driver dead, face twisted in terror, jaw unbroken, but missing every single tooth. And from that day forward, no one in Millbrook dared say their name aloud, but sometimes, in the still of night, you could hear it, the soft, steady sound of hunger. It was Agnes Thorne, the midwife, who broke the silence. She was 81, nearly blind, and spoke with a voice like brittle parchment. But when she heard the grinding beneath the chapel floor, she whispered something that made the townsfolk freeze. "The stones aren't fed, they feed." No one wanted to hear it. Not after the Hartwells disappeared, not after the sheriff's wife died coughing up white dust. But Agnes insisted. She had lived through the famine of 1843. She remembered what the Hartwell family was before the mill, before the stones began turning by themselves. They didn't build that mill, she said, they unearthed it. And suddenly, it all made sense. Too much sense. The strange alignment of the creek, the unnatural depth of the foundation, the fact that no tools were ever seen brought to the site during its so-called construction. It was as if the Hartwells found something ancient buried in the soil and simply built a shell around it, and what they found was alive. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because every legend starts local, and this one's far from over. The town tried to bury the truth again, but the whispers returned, this time in children's mouths. 11-year-olds talking about dreams of teeth in the walls, a 4-year-old who said, "The white man in the floor wants more dust." No one taught them these words, and then the chapel itself began to rot, not from rain, not from neglect. The wood blackened from within, the altar warped, the Bibles dissolved into white powder. When Father Maynard tried to cleanse the church with prayer, he suffered a seizure mid-sermon and screamed only one phrase before collapsing: "Bring them back, the stones remember." And then came the birds. Hundreds of them. Crows, starlings, redwings, circling above the steeple in perfect spirals for 13 nights straight. No noise, no droppings, just watching. Until Finney's ally, on the 14th night, the spiral broke, and every window in the church shattered from the inside out. The town council gave in. They sent for outsiders, historians, surveyors, even a team from Yale's Department of Antiquities. Only 2 arrived. One stayed less than a day. The other, Dr. Raymond Clark, stayed longer. And what he discovered underneath the chapel would become the most terrifying entry in his journal, now sealed in the restricted archives of the university. A spiral staircase, hewn from black stone, descending into a space colder than death, and a voice recorded once, speaking in a language no one could trace, a voice that said, "We remember, we grind, we hunger." They sealed the staircase with concrete, 6 full trucks worth. Dr. Raymond Clark never returned to Yale. His assistant, Margaret Belrose, wrote one letter before disappearing on the train ride home. That letter, smuggled into the archives by a former librarian, contains just 3 sentences. "The spiral was breathing. I saw faces in the stone. Do not let them wake." But the concrete cracked, not from pressure, not from age, from within. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if this is the first time you're hearing this story, it may already be too late. The chapel was abandoned. A fence went up. Signs posted, "Unsafe structure, do not enter." But they couldn't keep the locals out, especially the teenagers, drawn to darkness like moths to an open flame. They said it was just a ghost story. Until 1891, when the Abernathy twins disappeared. All that was found were their boots, neatly placed on the altar steps, and a black smear on the floorboards. When samples were sent to Boston for analysis, the response came back 1 week later. Organic, not human, possibly Precambrian. But that wasn't the end, because late that same year, the old mill wheel, dormant since the Hartwells vanished, began to turn. There was no water in the creek, no wind, and yet it groaned out and to motion, slow and ancient, as if resuming a task it had always known. Children in nearby homes woke up screaming. One boy carved a perfect spiral into the wall with his fingernails. A widow down the road swore she saw her dead husband walking toward the chapel, mouth full of flour and teeth missing. The town finally voted to demolish both structures, the church and the mill. But the demolition crew never arrived. No one knows who cancelled them. By 1893, the entire east side of Millbrook was abandoned, houses left with meals still on the table. Clocks stopped at 3:13 a.m. The last letter ever mailed from that sector reads, "It isn't the place, it's what they fed, and it's still hungry." Today the area is listed as a wildlife preserve, but no animals live there. And every spring when the snow melts, people say you can hear it, grinding, grinding, grinding beneath the trees. The tape was marked, "Property of the Vermont Historical Society, do not duplicate." But someone did. A janitor at the university found it mislabeled in the audio-visual archives, tucked behind a reel on Revolutionary War correspondence. He took it home out of curiosity. What he heard made him vomit. Not from fear, something deeper. Like his stomach recognized the sound before his mind did. It was 26 minutes of low, rhythmic grinding, metal on stone, bone on wood. No one could tell. But layered beneath it, if you slowed the tape down by 40%, was a voice. Feminine, not speaking exactly, humming. A lullaby with no melody, just 4 repeating syllables, over and over again. No more doors, no more doors. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because in places like Millbrook, the doors weren't just closed, they were sealed for your protection. When they traced the tape's origin, it didn't come from Vermont at all. It came from a facility in Maryland, a faux. Daryl Sound Laboratory closed in 1974. Files declassified later hinted at a failed project, acoustic cartography of subterranean structures in the Northeast. They weren't recording history, they were listening for something beneath it. One memo, stamped Black Rook, described anomalous resonance signatures under several ghost towns across New England. The most volatile, Millbrook. When probed, the ground didn't echo. It answered. The experiments were shut down after the soil began emitting frequencies that triggered seizures in lab personnel. One man died. His autopsy report read, brain matter showed spiral folding inconsistent with human anatomy. Cause of death, internal resonance collapse. They buried the data, ordered all media destroyed, but the janitor had already made a copy. He uploaded the tape to an old message board in 2003. It vanished within 48 hours, but not before a user from Idaho downloaded and analyzed the spectrogram. His conclusion? There's a face in the waveform, not human, smiling. He never posted again. Some believe the sound predates language, that it's not a message to us, but from something older, something that doesn't speak but remembers. That the lullaby is the last sound the Hartwell family heard, that it's not a warning. It's an invitation. On October 12, 1901, a young surveyor named Elias Denton arrived in Millbrook to chart the abandoned East Sector. He was hired by the state to assess land stability for a possible railway extension. His diary, found months later near the edge of the tree line, was soaked in blood, but legible. The first 3 days of entries are mundane. Soil samples, sketches of collapsed structures, notes on wind patterns. But day 4 changes everything. He writes, "Found the church, or what's left of it. The foundation is cracked. Something is moving underneath it. I measured a tremor, very slight, but constant. 0.2 hertz. That's not natural." Then this. "I heard children laughing. I followed the sound and found teeth in the grass, baby teeth. Some of them still had the roots." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what Elias Denton documented next is the reason no maps show Millbrook's eastern quadrant after 1902. Day 5. The stone spiral under the chapel is exposed, concrete peeled back like paper. There are carvings, rows of them. Little shapes like hands pressed into the walls. No tools used, just pressure. I touched one. It was warm. Then day 6. I didn't sleep. The sound is louder now. A deep, wet rhythm, not mechanical, more like breathing. The spiral is not architecture, it's anatomy. No entries after that. His body was found near a shallow ditch, eyes wide open, fingers shattered at every joint, as if he'd tried to claw through stone. The autopsy reported cardiac arrest, but the coroner's notes mentioned something strange. His tongue was missing, but there was no incision. It was as if it dissolved inside his mouth. His tools, camera, and maps were confiscated. The land was declared geologically unstable. Railway plans were scrapped, and the state of Vermont quietly changed the district boundaries so Millbrook's eastern edge no longer appeared on official charts. But hikers still wander too close. They say their compasses spin near the chapel ruins. Some claim to hear a humming lullaby under the ground. Others report dreams, spirals of teeth, long corridors filled with breathing stone, and a voice that says, "Come closer, you were always mine." One ranger tried to burn the site in 1949. The fire wouldn't catch. He poured gasoline. Nothing. He said the earth felt wet, but not with water. 2 weeks later he hung himself in the ranger tower. The note pinned to his chest read, "No more doors." There was a girl named Mabel Wren who lived in Millbrook before the tragedy, only 6 years old when the institution fell silent. No official records show her leaving town, but a police report filed in 1904, 3 years after the event, shows up in a Boston precinct. The report is brief. A woman was found wandering outside South Station, barefoot, hair matted with pine needles, clutching a doll made of stitched human hair. She gave only one name, Mabel. When asked where she came from, she whispered, "They're still playing the game. I didn't want to be it anymore." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what happened to Mabel Wren was erased, but not forgotten. Her memories bleed through in places where the veil wears thin. Doctors called her catatonic, but one night a nurse heard her humming. Not a song, something older, a vibration. The nurse collapsed from a sudden migraine. When she woke, Mabel was standing over her, holding a crumpled drawing. The paper showed an orphanage, stone walls, long corridor, but the windows were covered with skin. Every single one. The nurse was institutionalized the next month, ranting about the faceless ones who eat quiet. Mabel was transferred to a private facility outside Salem. For years she didn't speak, but she drew. Hundreds of pages, all spirals, always spirals, some wide, like tunnels, others tight and ragged, like whorls of bone. One day, she drew a map. It matched the Hartwell property's underground layout perfectly. This was before the 1967 excavation that confirmed the orphanage had hidden sublevels. Her doctors were baffled. There was one last sketch in her file, dated December 1st, 1911. It showed a door underground, and next to it a little girl without a face holding hands with something tall, grey, and bent backward at the waist. The caption in a child's scrawl read, "This time, I stay outside." She died that winter. No cause, no trauma, no explanation. Her body was found cold, mouth open in silent scream, but eyes calm. As if she'd seen something she finally understood. The institution buried her with no headstone. But the grave keeps sinking. Every year, an inch deeper. Some say she's pulling. Had the earth down with her. Not to escape, but to finish what they started. In 1922, a psychiatric researcher named Dr. Harold Quinn visited the Whispering Pines site under a private grant from the Rosen Institute. His specialty was mass hysteria and psychic trauma. He believed that some locations retain emotional residue, what he called psychogenic sediment. Quinn stayed in Millbrook for 11 days. On the 12th, he was found wandering Route 9 with his coat inside out, mumbling coordinates and chewing on birch bark. He died 2 days later. But his journals, smuggled out by a student intern, tell a different story. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what Dr. Quinn uncovered wasn't psychological. It wasn't even biological. It was something older than either. His first notes are standard: soil composition, flora irregularities, barometric pressure. But by day 5, things unravel. I stood in the exact center of the ruin's foundation today. My ears popped as if I'd changed altitude. But the pressure increased downward. The earth beneath me is not inert. It's listening. He began to report missing time, several hours gone without memory. Then this. There's a second voice on my phonograph recordings. I record myself reading at night, but when I play them back, something else answers. Quinn described dreams identical to those once reported by survivors. Long corridors lined with teeth, doorways made of folded children's limbs, and a spiral staircase that descends forever but ends inside yourself. He dissected a dead raven he found near the chapel ruins. Inside its body was a human baby tooth. The student intern, Margaret Lowell, wrote in a secret letter. He was no longer alone. I would wake to hear him murmuring in two voices, one human, one like boiling water. He said the orphanage had no founder. It found itself. Tunt. His last night alive, Quinn wrote one final line in his journal, not in English but in phonetic. Symbols later matched to an extinct Algonquin dialect. It does not forget. It remembers through us, through me. He burned all his remaining papers, poured salt over the soil, and cut a spiral into his own palm, deep enough to expose bone. The coroner said he died of dehydration, but his mouth was packed with stones, smooth ones, from the orphanage garden. When police returned to investigate, the stone spiral in the chapel floor had changed. It was wider, as if it had been used recently. Locals claim that after Quinn's visit, the dreams spread. People in neighboring towns reported hearing a girl's voice at night, singing through the walls. I'm still here, and I brought friends. The game hadn't ended. It had evolved. They called it the Milk Teeth Room. That was the name scrawled in charcoal on a door in the eastern basement of Whispering Pines, found during the 1967 excavation. The door was only 4 feet tall, wedged behind a collapsed pantry wall, sealed with melted wax, human fingernails, and cloth strips torn from nightgowns. Archaeologists tried to open it. None succeeded. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what was behind that door was never supposed to be found. And someone, or something, went to great lengths to keep it shut. The team documented cold air leaking from beneath the door. One researcher claimed he heard children breathing on the other side. Another reported a metallic scraping sound, slow, rhythmic, like something sharpening teeth. Dr. Elise Hammond, head of the dig, noted a disturbing coincidence. Every worker who entered that eastern chamber developed spontaneous gum infections, so severe that 7 of them lost multiple teeth within weeks. She wrote in her field log, "We are unearthing a memory, not a structure. This place doesn't want to be seen. It wants to be fed." A week later, she vanished into was shed. Her tent was found undisturbed, clothes still packed, notes intact, but her shoes sat neatly in front of the sealed door, and in their place, a baby tooth, still bloody, still warm. A forensic dentist later confirmed it was one of Hammond's. The state shut down the dig within days, but in 1983, a teenage boy named Corey Phelps broke into the site on a dare. He never made it out. His friend waited outside for hours before running for help. Corey's body was found curled in a fetal position next to the sealed door, with a terrified look frozen on his face and all his teeth removed. Not knocked out, removed surgically. But here's what no one could explain. There was no blood. Not in his mouth, not on the floor, not on his clothes. Just a circle drawn in chalk around his body, and the word "listen" scratched into the dirt wall behind him. No one talks about it now, but every 10 years someone vanishes near the ruins, and when they do, local children report the same thing. They lose a tooth in the night, not from decay, not from accident. They simply wake up, and it's gone. And sometimes beneath the pillow they don't find a coin. They find a note, written in ash. It always says the same thing. Tag, you're it. In 1991, the Millbrook Historical Society received an anonymous donation, an old wooden box sealed with pitch and bound in rusted wire. There was no return address, only a burned-in inscription on the lid. Do not open unless it calls you first. Naturally, they opened it. Inside, 9 wax cylinders, the kind used in Edison's early phonograph machines, each one labeled with a date ranging from 1885 to 1886, exactly the final year of operation for Whispering Pines Orphanage. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what was on those recordings has never been released to the public in full. Only fragments were leaked by an intern in 1993, and those alone were enough to drive one archivist to suicide. The cylinders were transferred to analog tape and examined by a joint team of audio historians and psychologists. The first few seemed like normal children's songs, though oddly slowed, the tempo dragging in unnatural ways, almost weeping between notes. But as the cylinders progressed, the content shifted. One recording captured a voice, not a child's, not an adult's, but something in between, repeating numbers. 4, 4, 1, 1, 5, down, down, 4, skin, skin, 1. Background analysis detected what sounded like wet chewing. Then there was the infamous 7th cylinder. It begins with silence. Then, 20 seconds in, the unmistakable sound of a child screaming, not in fear, but in rage. What follows is a whispered chant in reverse Latin, then a long, dragging scrape, as if fingernails were being pulled slowly across the inside of a coffin. Several listeners described feeling watched during playback. Others reported auditory hallucinations afterward, hearing knocks from inside walls, or children humming when no one was near. The final cylinder is the most disturbing. It plays a lullaby in a minor key, sung in harmony by at least a dozen children. But midway through, one voice drops out, then another, until only one is left. And then that voice changes. It deepens, slows, morphs into a rasp that gurgles out, "The game is still on. You were never out." At the end of the tape, someone, likely the person who made the box, added a handwritten note. "I destroyed the machine. I burned the walls. I salted the earth, but they still speak. They use the teeth as keys." None of the wax cylinders are available to the public anymore. They've been locked away in an underground archive at the University of Massachusetts. And yet, every few years, collectors claim they receive mysterious tapes in the mail. No return address, no packaging, just a reel marked, "Play me before it plays you." Listen, many report a girl's voice whispering from the static. "It's your turn now." In the spring of 2004, a construction crew was hired to clear forested land near the original site of Whispering Pines. They were building luxury cabins, escape homes for Boston elites. The crew joked about ghosts and curses as they cleared the last of the trees. No one laughed the next morning, because during excavation they hit something solid. At just 6 feet down, the backhoe struck a large stone slab, perfectly smooth, unnatural in shape. Beneath it, when pried open, was a staircase, narrow, carved into bedrock, and leading down into absolute darkness. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what those men found underground matches no official records, no architectural plans, and no theory of sane origin. The first 2 men who entered didn't make it more than 20 feet before they both screamed and scrambled back out, one vomiting, the other clawing at his face, shouting, "I saw my brother, but he's dead. He died in 92. He called my name like he was still 10 years old." But his brother had never even lived in Vermont. 2 brave or reckless workers went back down with flashlights and a camcorder. Only one came back, shaking, crying, incoherent. He never spoke again. The camera was recovered 3 days later, smeared with a thick resin like sap or bile. Most of the footage was static, corrupted, but 11 seconds were intact. In that fragment, the flashlight cuts across a narrow hallway lined with shelves, hundreds of shelves, labeled not with names but with birth dates. On each shelf sat tiny jars. Inside every jar, a baby tooth, human. One shelf was labeled "Donors Returned." At the end of the hallway, they captured a glimpse of something moving, tall, emaciated, crawling across the wall backwards, its limbs bent wrong, its face hid. Then beneath a stitched leather mask, it paused, turned toward the camera, and smiled. The footage ends with a low moan, not from the man filming but from behind the camera. A third voice, Company halted construction, the land was sold off, and a no trespassing order was placed on the entire site, enforced by private security. But in the years since, hikers in the area report hearing children crying underground. Not sad, playing, calling out, "You're it!" One ranger even claimed to see footprints in fresh snow, barefoot, child-sized, leading up from nowhere and vanishing at the edge of the trail, just before dusk. The ranger said the strangest thing was this: the snow had melted around the prints like something warm had come from below. In 2011, a college student named Marla Jennings decided to make Whispering Pines her thesis. A psychology major with a minor in folklore, she was fascinated by what she called intergenerational trauma made physical. She believed that the orphanage itself acted as a kind of psychic echo chamber, amplifying grief, fear, and abuse into a living entity. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because Marla's findings never made it to publication. Her notes, however, tell a story no one's been able to explain or forget. She spent 3 nights camping alone near the site. On the second night, she reported in her journal, "I heard laughter in the trees, not near me, high up, like it was coming from the tops of the pines." On the third night, she made her final recording. The audio was later recovered by her professor, who became concerned when she didn't return. In the tape, Marla is calm, but her breathing is fast. She whispers, "I found the original foundations. I think there's something beneath it. I can hear it humming, like teeth grinding in a skull." Then, static. But in the background, just before the tape ends, a faint voice says, "You came back. You all come back." Marla's body was never found. Her tent was discovered 100 yards from the sealed sub-basement, shredded on the inside. Her journal was intact. The final page had a drawing, not of a person, of a tree, a pine tree, with faces growing out of the bark like tumors. Small, childlike faces with mouths wide open. Some were screaming, some were smiling, all of them had missing teeth. And at the base of the tree, a single word carved in, "Home." Weeks later, a local logging company accidentally felled a massive old-growth pine near the site. The rings indicated it was over 200 years old, but embedded just 6 inches beneath the bark, they found something unnatural: metal tags, dozens of them, each one engraved with a name and date, many of which matched the vanished children reported missing from Whispering Pines between 1865 and 1890. No one could explain how those tags got inside the tree, or why the wood near them appeared burned despite no evidence of fire. That same night, a logger was found on the edge of the forest, his mouth sewn shut with pine needles and twine. But he was still alive, and when the doctors cut the threads and asked him what happened, he only said one word: "Shh." The town of Harrow's Hollow tried to bury it all, again. After the Jennings incident and the logger's hospitalization, Vermont state officials declared the Whispering Pines site environmentally contaminated. They sealed it under state protection and warned of toxic fungal spores as a deterrent to trespassers. But locals knew better. They always had. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because there are things in those woods that science will never sanitize. In 2015, a former inmate named Derek Boone, who'd grown up in Harrow's Hollow, returned home after 19 years in prison. He told friends that when he was 6 years old, he was sent to Whispering Pines for discipline. He said the punishments were not human. Boone claimed that deep in the orphanage, as cellar, children were hollowed. He wouldn't explain what that meant, but he kept repeating a phrase his counselor used to whisper before locking him in the furnace room: "God isn't watching here, only the roots." Boone started sleeping in cemeteries, scribbling in chalk on mausoleum doors, drawings of doorways, teeth, and children with blank eyes. Then one night he broke into the home of Dr. Ellen Martine, the lead psychologist from Whispering Pines' final operational year, 1884. She was long dead, but her descendants had preserved her journals. Boone didn't steal money or valuables. He took only one thing: a leather-bound ledger marked "Failures." 2 days later, Boone was found hanging in the woods, his body suspended 30 feet in the air, tethered by vines that didn't belong to any known plant species in Vermont. His fingernails were torn off, In his hand, clenched tight even in death, was a torn page from the ledger. The page listed 19 names, all of them marked "returned to soil." Beside each was a red ink drawing of a pine cone, split in half with an eye inside. Forensic analysts couldn't determine the ink's origin. It wasn't blood, it wasn't paint. It contained no recognizable compounds, and on Boone's back, carved deep into his flesh, were 4 letters. Seed. That same week, every tree on the eastern edge of the forest shed its bark overnight. Not leaves, bark. The exposed wood underneath looked scorched, as if the trees had been struck from within by heat, not lightning. That forest line has never regrown, and locals now say, if you step past where the bark ends, you'll hear them breathing under your feet. There are photographs, locked away, hidden in private archives, and never shown to the public. Taken in 1886 by Dr. Ellen Martine herself, they were intended to document progress in behavior correction at Whispering Pines, but what they captured is something else entirely. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the moment you see the eyes in those pictures, you know something else was watching back. The children in the photos are unnaturally still, hands folded, spines ramrod straight, staring directly at the camera, but it's their expressions that unsettle even the most hardened researchers. They're not scared, not shy, not hollow. They're listening. Somewhere beyond the photographer, their eyes are drawn to something just out of frame, like a voice only they can hear. In the corner of one photo, a child's lips are parted in a whisper, caught mid-sentence. Forensic lip readers later analyzed the image. They all agreed he's mouthing the phrase, "They're standing behind you." But there was no one behind the photographer, no one alive at least. In another photo, the walls of the dining hall are covered in symbols, not painted, not chalked, but carved into the wooden panels with meticulous repetition, spirals, hooks, roots, eyes, and rows of teeth. Dr. Martine's own journal admits that she didn't authorize the carvings. She wrote, "The children say they appear overnight, every night. I sand them down, but they return, sharper, deeper, hungrier." One photo shows the infirmary, empty, except for the outline of a child-sized figure in the dust on a bed, though no child is present. And next to that impression, etched into the glass of a medical cabinet, is a phrase written from the inside, "Don't make us sleep again." The glass was never broken, the cabinet was locked. There are 12 photos in total. Only 8 have been seen by archivists. The final 4 are sealed under a legal gag order, stored in a private university collection in Massachusetts. But one intern who viewed them before the lockup left an anonymous forum post years later. The last photo isn't of a child, it's of the forest floor. Breathing, I mean literally breathing. The ground rises and falls like lungs, and in the center there's something pushing up from underneath. Something big, but it's not trying to escape, it's trying to return. She ended the post with 3 words. "Don't dig there." In 1887, a blizzard sealed the valley for 6 straight weeks. No food in, no letters out, no way to reach the orphanage through the mountain pass. But when the thaw came, and the townsfolk finally climbed their way to Whispering Pines, they didn't find starvation, they found silence. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what they discovered inside those walls would be buried for over a century, and not by snow. The children were all gone, every bed made, every dish clean, no bodies, no signs of struggle, just rows of small shoes lined up at the front door as if waiting for inspection. But what truly disturbed the search party was the state of the chapel. The pulpit had been removed. In its place was a crude altar made of stacked mattresses and twisted bed frames, arranged with careful symmetry. Surrounding it were hundreds of paper dolls, hand-cut, childlike, standing upright in tight circles around the center. Each doll had a name written in charcoal, names that matched the missing children, but some had names no one recognized, names that did not exist in any record or enrollment log. One name appeared over and over, Avery. It wasn't until 2 years later, in a private hearing of the Vermont Children's Commission, that the significance of that name became clear. A surviving child from the orphanage, one who had been adopted shortly before the blizzard, spoke up for the first time. At just 10 years old, he said, "Avery isn't a name. It's a sound the forest makes when it's full, when it's eaten too much." He went on to describe dreams he had every night in the orphanage. A tall, faceless man with tree bark for skin. He called him the Walking Root. The boy claimed the Walking Root told them when to sleep, when to wake, and when to give back what was borrowed. Investigators dismissed it as trauma-induced fantasy, but the boy's adopted family kept a diary of his sleepwalking episodes. One entry reads, "He stood at the edge of the forest, arms outstretched, chanting in a language we've never heard. He said he was calling the others home, that they were cold underground." The family moved across the country shortly after. The boy disappeared 6 months later. In their basement, they found a map drawn in crayon showing the location of Whispering Pines, but not the one from 1887. This map had roots spreading outward, reaching other towns, other children. They thought it was over. After the blizzard, after the silence, after the children vanished without a trace, Whispering Pines Orphanage was condemned, boarded up, and left to rot beneath a thick veil of pine needles and fog. But in 1902, 15 years later, surveyors mapping the forest stumbled on something no one could explain. Not ruins, a new building. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what these men found wasn't just a forgotten relic. It was something that should have never been there in the first place. The structure stood deep in the forest, far beyond where the orphanage once stood. Identical in shape. Same Gothic windows, same weather vane on the roof, a crooked bird with no wings. But the original building had burned down in 1891 during a lightning storm. That was documented, filed, verified. So what was this? One surveyor, Charles Redford, wrote in his field journal, "It's not a ruin, it's pristine, no vines, no rot. The windows are clean. I looked through one and saw movement, children, sitting in rows, heads bowed, all identical, all still." He and his team entered the building to investigate. What happened next only Redford survived to report. He said the interior was empty, no furniture, no dust, just wooden floors so polished they reflected light like a mirror. But the reflection was wrong. The men's shadows moved independently. One reached up and touched the ceiling. Another blinked when they didn't. Then they heard it. A low, whispering hum, not from the building, but from beneath it. Redford claims one of the surveyors began bleeding from the ears. Another started convulsing and shouting a string of numbers backward. The last one simply sat down, smiled, and said, "I remember now. I'm one of them." Redford ran. He didn't stop until he reached the logging road miles away, face and hands scratched raw from the underbrush. When authorities returned days later, the structure was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. Only the imprints of its foundation remained, burned into the ground like a scar. But the strangest detail, beneath where the pulpit would have stood, they found a tunnel, freshly dug, descending in a perfect spiral of stone steps, hand-chiseled, disappearing into the earth. They only went 20 feet down before turning back. The walls were warm to the touch, and they pulsed, as if breathing. You might think this was folklore by now. A ghost story for cold nights. But the Whispering Pines file, what remains of it, isn't kept in folklore archives. It's kept in the restricted wing of the Vermont State Hospital records. Why? Because in 1924, long after the orphanage was erased from maps, a psychiatric patient named Margaret Odell began drawing things she couldn't possibly have known. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because when a woman who's never been to school starts sketching floor plans of a building that vanished 40 years earlier, someone is lying. Margaret was 83 years old, never married, no children, lived her whole life in a farmhouse outside Barra, Vermont. She'd been admitted for episodes of catatonic chanting and obsessive repetitive drawing. But it wasn't until the orderlies examined the contents of her suitcase that everything changed. Inside were 87 pages of parchment, hand-drawn diagrams of a large building labeled Whispering Pines Orphanage. Not just the upstairs dorms, not just the chapel, but the basement. A basement that, officially, was never built. Margaret had drawn cells, stone corridors, chambers labelled feeding room, hearing box, and most disturbingly, root chamber, no eyes allowed. Authorities dismissed it, until one orderly, James Teller, decided to visit the site himself, quietly. He found nothing at first, but late in the evening, while walking along what was once the north wing of the orphanage, he stepped through a patch of moss and fell 6 feet into a hollow chamber. Stone floors, chisel marks, exactly as Margaret's diagrams described. He reported the finding. By morning, the chamber had collapsed. When they brought Margaret in to tell her, she stared blankly at them, then whispered, "It doesn't like being seen. It buries its mouth when we remember." She died 2 nights later during an episode. Her final drawing, tucked under her pillow, showed dozens of children walking in a spiral downwards into the ground. Their eyes were blacked out, but their mouths were open, sewn shut. Each child held a paper doll, and every paper doll had the same name written on its chest: Avery. No one could explain how Margaret knew that name. She had no surviving family, no access to records. And yet her writing matched the charcoal lettering found on the dolls from 1887, almost stroke for stroke. When the hospital burned down in 1926, only one thing was recovered from her room: a single line scratched into the wall beneath her bed. The forest never forgets its children. It just waits until they forget themselves. In 1943, a forestry crew clearing trees for a wartime logging operation near the former Whispering Pines site reported something that was immediately classified by Vermont officials as psychological fatigue. But the men knew what they saw, and they never came back. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the truth wasn't in their exhaustion. It was in what they left behind, sealed in a notebook smeared with mud, blood, and ash. The crew had been working through a dense portion of land just east of the burned orphanage grounds. The soil there was unusually soft. Their boots sank like stepping into lungs. Old roots snapped like cartilage. Then, around dusk, they found something buried under a rotting hemlock stump. Something none of them would speak of directly in the days that followed. A door, iron, riveted, about 4 feet wide. But it wasn't attached to a frame. It was lying face down in the dirt, like it had been torn from the ground, then flipped, then dragged. They turned it over, and that's when everything began to unravel. The men wrote about a smell, not of decay or mold, but of teeth, of something alive and unbreathing. The diary described noises they couldn't explain: the wet flutter of wings underground, the slow echo of weeping from below soil level, and the unmistakable sound of children humming in reverse. Within hours, 2 men refused to continue working. By midnight, one of them was gone. No blood, no signs of struggle. His boots were left at the site, standing upright as if he'd simply stepped out of himself. The team left immediately, but one returned later that week, alone, with a camera. That camera was found in 1957 at a pawn shop in Rutland, wrapped in a linen cloth that had been hand-stitched with a name: Samuel Avery. The film was damaged, overexposed, almost useless, except for one frame, one perfectly centered, well-lit frame. It shows the doorway, not in the ground but standing upright in the woods. The frame is crooked, the hinges are bleeding rust, and behind the door, a child, standing barefoot in the snow, smiling, head tilted too far to the left, as if listening to something no adult could ever understand. The child's face was pale, but the shadows behind him, those weren't shadows, they were hands. In 1961, a Jesuit scholar named Father Bernard Delacroix quietly entered the woods outside Whispering Pines with a leather satchel, a brass crucifix, and a stack of hand-copied 14th-century exorcism rites written in Latin no one had used in centuries. He was never officially sent by the church, but someone, or something, called him. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the Vatican never acknowledged what Father Delacroix claimed he found in Vermont, but he wrote it all down, in a final letter, sent to a single contact in New York City. That letter was intercepted by the FBI, declassified in 2003. Its contents were never supposed to be seen by the public. It begins, "This place is older than our language, older than our soul. I followed the hum in the soil. The spiral staircase is no longer stone. It is flesh. It recognizes me." Delacroix believed the land where Whispering Pines once stood was not cursed in the traditional sense. It was inhabited, not by demons, not by ghosts, but by a kind of ancient echo, a parasitic memory that latches onto human grief and reforms it into structure. Buildings, rooms, doors, even children. He called them effigies of the mourning root. Not real children, not spirits, but imitations, created from the pain of the forgotten, fed by loss, given shape by rituals older than scripture. Delacroix descended the staircase found beneath the orphanage grounds. He said it took 47 steps. At the bottom, a chapel made of bone, not human bone, but something larger, bent, smoothed, carved with what he described as language without letters. There were pews, and every pew held a child-sized figure, wrapped in linen, heads bowed, mouths sewn shut with pine needles, but they were breathing. He described the pulpit, built from polished femen, earth, and the altar stained with something darker than blood. Upon it, a book, blank, except for a single word written in charcoal. "Mother." Delacroix said he tried to pray, but the words came out backwards, and then he heard them, whispering his childhood name. He ran. The last line of the letter reads, "Do not follow the children. They do not remember being children. They remember being left." In the winter of 1974, a group of amateur paranormal investigators, college students from upstate New York, vanished near the ruins of Whispering Pines. Their car was later found with the engine still running, headlights cutting through the frozen mist, doors wide open. Inside, their cassette recorder played a continuous loop of static, punctuated by the sound of breathing. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because one of those tapes was eventually recovered. But it didn't come from the police. It came from a locked safety deposit box opened 30 years later by the investigator's sister, who only found it after their father's death. The box contained a single item, the tape labeled WPO, Session 7, Basement Voices. What you hear on that recording isn't just sound, it's a warning. The students had arrived 2 days earlier, armed with Geiger counters, infrared film, and an old priest's journal, possibly Father Delacroix's, that described the location of an underground entrance sealed by blackened timber and iron rivets. They found the door just before nightfall. The journal told them not to enter if the temperature dropped below freezing. They went in anyway. The tape captures everything. At first it's laughter, nervous energy, jokes about demons and ghosts, then footsteps, then more footsteps, but no one's speaking. And then the sound shifts. One voice, a girl, asks, "Whose hand is that?" Another voice replies, trembling, "Nobody's touching you." What follows next is 15 minutes of silence, not static, not ambient room tone. Absolute silence, until something begins to tap against the microphone, then breathing, wet, close, uneven, as if the recorder is being held inside someone's mouth. Then, clear as day, a third voice. "We found Mother, but she's not sleeping, she's building." Then a mechanical click, and then chaos. Screams layered on screams, the sound of flesh hitting wet stone. Then that final moment, the unmistakable sound of a child singing Rockabye Baby in reverse, distorted, deep, like it's coming from a throat not built for human language. And then, just before the tape cuts to static, a whisper. "We're not dead. We're just remembered." Authorities claimed the students froze to death in the woods, but none of their bodies were ever recovered, only a single left shoe, filled with ash. In 1981, a fire inspector named Howard Ellis visited the grounds of Whispering Pines after a series of brush fires were reported along the tree line. He was a rational man, 22 years on the job, a veteran, deeply skeptical of local legends. He carried a flare gun, a thermal camera, and a strong conviction that most mysteries could be explained by wiring faults or teenagers with too much time. He called his wife at 4:47 p.m., said he'd be home by 6. He never came back. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because the report Ellis filed, found weeks later in the glove compartment of his burned-out truck, never made it into official archives. It was buried, but a retired archivist mailed a photocopy to a newspaper in 1993. It was a single-page, handwritten note. Temperature on ground normal, but under the chapel, heat signature off the charts. Something pulsing below. Heard voice calling from beneath tree roots. Female, said my name, said she forgave me. Ellis never had a daughter. No one ever claimed the voice. But thermal satellite data confirms that. For 6 consecutive nights that year, a perfect circle of heat 32 feet across bloomed in the earth directly, beneath the chapel, glowing like a wound in the dark. A week later, hikers reported hundreds of dead birds blanketing the nearby ridge, all with their beaks shattered, eyes missing, and small spirals etched into the cartilage beneath their wings. Autopsy reports never released, but one ornithologist said the patterns weren't random. They resembled glyphs, ancient symbols carved into Mesopotamian burial sites, usually found protecting against the unquiet dead. That same month, a woman named Eloise Hamlin, who had been institutionalized since 1912, sat up in her hospital bed and recited the names of the original children lost at Whispering Pines in perfect order before flatlining. Her family claimed she hadn't spoken in 40 years. When staff checked her bedside drawer, they found a drawing, dated and signed, of a creature made of stone, ash and blood. Standing beneath a spiraling sky, she called it the listener below. They sealed her room. It's still locked today. In 1992, a team of graduate students from Miskatonic University, yes, the same university rumored to be linked to countless forbidden texts, took an unauthorized trip to Vermont. Their research project, innocently titled Forgotten Institutions of the Northeast, was meant to be a photojournalism essay, but something changed when they reached Whispering Pines. Only one student, Alan Vireo, returned, and he didn't speak for 6 years. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what Alan finally said in a psychiatric interview released under court order in 2007 rewrote everything we thought we knew about the orphanage. Alan's first words were, "It wasn't abandoned, it was waiting." He described the air around the foundation of the orphanage as thick, like walking through warm water. The sky overhead bent downward. Trees leaned in at unnatural angles. They camped near the foundation and made jokes to keep the dread away, until 2:17 a.m. That's when they heard what they thought were children playing. But the laughter had no echo. They followed it, through thickets, past the chapel remains, deeper into a pit they swore hadn't been there during daylight, and at the bottom, a classroom, perfectly intact, desks, chalkboard, a single oil lamp flickering, and children, not moving, not breathing, just waiting, heads down, hands folded, eyes open. Every one of them identical to the missing orphans from 1886, every one with their mouths sewn shut, but still whispering. Alan tried to run, but the other students, Lara, Chet, and Miriam, didn't move. They sat, quietly, took seats at the desks, and smiled. They turned toward Alan and spoke with one voice. "We missed you, brother." Alan ran until dawn. He clawed through brush. He doesn't remember sleeping, eating, or how he returned to his car. But what he found in his back seat broke him. 4 child-sized notebooks filled with entries in his own handwriting. Each page began with the same sentence. "Today, I made her proud." Alan was committed 2 days later. The notebooks? Confiscated by federal agents. The pit? Gone. But Alan swears it wasn't a hallucination. It was a test. A summons. And he failed. He still wakes up at 2:17 a.m. every night, because sometimes he hears them writing. There was a letter, dated October 17th, 1886. Just days before the final disappearance at Whispering Pines. It was discovered by a local librarian in 2003, sealed behind the crumbling baseboard of an abandoned cottage once owned by the orphanage's groundskeeper. The letter was addressed to Dr. Enoch Vale, Providence, Rhode Island. The contents? A desperate plea. The children are not sleeping, Enoch. They do not dream. They repeat things no child should know. They speak of numbers, of stars inside bones, of hands behind the walls. They do not blink anymore. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because this letter, authenticated by 3 independent historians, may hold the only known eyewitness account from within the final days of Whispering Pines. The author, presumed to be Isaac Groll, the groundskeeper, continues, "They gather each night in the basement, but there is no basement. The blueprints show no such room. I barred the cellar door and nailed it shut. Still they go below. Still they come back. Wrong." The girl with no name speaks in Latin, but her tongue is gone. The twins now share the same dream, though they sleep apart, and when I ask them what the dream shows, they say, "Mother's eyes, under the floor." The floor. The chapel floor. Years later, in 2014, a private investigator named Lena March followed this lead. She used ground-penetrating radar beneath the remains of the chapel foundation. The scan revealed something disturbing. A circular chamber, 11 feet wide, 15 feet deep, lined with human femurs. But when excavation was requested, the state denied it. No explanation, no hearing. Case closed. The letter concludes with a final chilling line. "If you receive this, burn it, and tell no one. I fear I have fed it too long. It listens now. It learns. I believe I named it without knowing. I called it Mercy." The implication? That Mercy Hill, the supposed founder of the orphanage, may never have existed at all. That Mercy was not a person, but a thing, a force, and the orphans, merely its vessels, or worse, its choir. In 2016, drone footage captured something no human eye had seen since 1886, or perhaps ever. A documentary team investigating regional hauntings flew a drone over the ruins of Whispering Pines during the autumn equinox. At precisely 3:03 p.m., the sun cast an unnatural shadow from the chapel's crumbled frame. Not a spire, not a steeple, but it was a spiral, perfectly symmetrical, turning clockwise, spinning not on the ground but in mid-air, as though projected from inside the earth itself. The footage went viral for 6 hours, then it vanished. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because a former YouTube employee, under anonymity, later confessed that the video was flagged not by copyright, not by user complaint, but by an unknown algorithm labeled Archive Omega. It wasn't part of YouTube's system. No one could trace its origin, but that same week, the filmmaker, a man named Carson Lee, stopped responding to texts. His phone location was last pinged 3 miles from the site. Police found his rental car, still running, driver's door wide open. Inside were field notes written in a frantic hand. "The trees aren't trees. They're watchers, sentinels, eyes inside bark. I heard the girl from the spiral. She said I was remembered. She said I was already chosen." The last line, "It doesn't want worship. It wants return." No signs of struggle, no footprints leaving the scene. Carson Lee was never found. Local rangers began to report a rise in unusual forest sounds near the ruins, wind patterns that reversed direction, birdsong that echoed before it started, and worst of all, crying from beneath the soil. Multiple search dogs refused to step near the chapel foundation, whimpering and pulling back violently. One handler claimed his dog yelped like it had been burned the moment it crossed the shadow of a broken beam, but nothing explained the next morning. 17 fresh handprints appeared in the dirt where the chapel floor once stood, all child-sized, all pressed deep from below, and on one, written in blood and ash, "Let her wake." The handprints didn't fade, even after rainfall, even after being cordoned off and covered, even me. And after local authorities tried to remove the topsoil entirely, they reappeared, 17 handprints pressed from below. Forensic teams called it unexplainable. Soil consistency didn't allow for reverse impressions of that depth, No burrowing animals, no seismic shifts, no vandalism, just perfect imprints returning again and again, as if something beneath was insisting on being remembered. One investigator, a soil analyst from Montpellier, quit the project after only 3 days. In his resignation letter, later leaked online, he wrote, "This land does not want to be disturbed. It is not a site, it is a body, and we are probing its skin." I heard the names in my sleep. I hadn't read the files yet, but I heard them. Mary, Ada, Eleanor, Junie. We are not digging into earth, we are trespassing memory. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what happened next forced the Vermont Historical Society to seal all access records related to Whispering Pines, both physical and digital. Anyone requesting access had to go through an FBI liaison. Why? Because one of the children's names the analyst dreamed, Eleanor T., had never been publicized. It had never even been recorded. But when a team from the University of Vermont examined recovered ledgers from a nearby church, they found a baptismal registry dated 1884. A smudged entry, first name Eleanor, last name Trumbull. Born to a mother listed only as E.T., the same initials branded into one of the trees behind the orphanage. But there's something else. The soil team discovered a vein of iron-rich sediment beneath the chapel, one that resonated at an audio frequency inaudible to human ears but measurable by specialized instruments. It vibrated at exactly 3. There are 3 heads. The same time the spiral appeared. The same time Carson Lee vanished. The same time the wind turned in the opposite direction for 7 seconds, captured on local weather data. The readings increased every week. The frequency wasn't fading, it was rising, like something preparing to break the surface, like something buried learning to scream. The nightmares returned across town, but they weren't just dreams anymore. Local physician Dr. Margot Ellis began documenting cases of shared hallucinations. Children waking up at precisely 3:03 a.m., reporting a woman in a grey shawl whispering from the corners of their bedrooms. They locked us beneath the song. Adults, many with no connection to the orphanage, reported waking with mud on their hands, the smell of iron and rot beneath their nails. Several were admitted to Rutland Psychiatric for sudden onset dissociative fugue. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because if you were in Vermont that winter, you may have been part of something your mind forced you to forget. One teacher, 62-year-old Gerald Banks, was found on the roof of the former elementary school, arms raised to the sky, chanting in a broken tongue that linguists later identified as a blend of archaic Welsh and pre-1850s Germanic root phrases. Not gibberish, language. He said he was trying to free the names from the pit. Authorities silenced it as a mental break, but what they never revealed was what was found beneath the floorboards of Gerald's classroom. 7 small dolls made of cloth and bone, eyes stitched shut with human hair. Each doll had initials carved into the back, the same initials that appeared on the Whispering Pines enrollment ledger. The dolls were tested. The cloth came from 19th century orphan smocks, but the bone fragments were modern, no more than 10 years old. The school was shut down that month. Structural instability, they said. But students had already spoken. In multiple journals, children had drawn spirals identical to the one seen on Carson Lee's chest. Some placed them over the bell tower. Others placed them beneath the swings. One in particular drew a spiral with a crack in the center, and beneath it a single word, breathe. The drawing was dated February 4th, 2006. That same night, a local seismologist detected a tremor just beneath the Whispering Pines foundation, too shallow to be tectonic, too rhythmic to be natural. It pulsed every 23 seconds, like a heartbeat, like something alive beneath the ruins. They told the town it was a plumbing issue. Old pipes expanding underground, said the municipal report. Nothing unusual. But those who lived near the ruins of Whispering Pines knew better. They heard it. A sound that didn't belong to any machine. A slow, wet thumping, as if the earth itself was remembering. And then came the children's drawings, dozens of them, posted anonymously around town, on telephone poles, church bulletin boards, taped to windshields. They all showed the same thing. A girl with no face, standing in the woods, holding a bell. And always, scrawled in red crayon at the bottom, "She's still calling them." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because if these events occurred in your town, you'd want someone to warn you before it was too late. A retired firefighter named Daniel Crane, now 78, finally spoke to a reporter from a Burlington newspaper. He admitted something chilling. On the night the orphanage burned in 1886, he saw someone watching from the ridge. Not a fireman, not a resident, a tall figure in black, holding something shaped like a shepherd's crook. "When I looked again," Daniel whispered, "they were gone. But I swear the flame bent away from him, as if the fire feared him." The reporter never published the interview. Her voice recorder stopped working halfway through the conversation. When she got home, her apartment had been ransacked. But nothing was stolen, except one thing: her grandmother's locket, which held a photo of her when she was 7. Inside that photo, someone had scratched the background, and standing behind her tiny frame, it was the shadow of a tall, hooded figure, the same crooked staff, the same missing face. That week, her dog wouldn't stop barking at the closet. 3 days later, she quit journalism, moved to Arizona, never spoke publicly again. But here's what she left behind in her handwritten notes. The Whispering Pines fire wasn't an accident. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a ritual. And I think it's not finished yet. They weren't trying to escape. They were trying to keep something in July of 1999, long after Whispering Pines had crumbled into soil and ash. A forestry crew unearthed a sealed wooden hatch beneath a tangle of roots, deep inside the overgrowth that had swallowed the orphanage grounds. It was hexagonal, hand-carved, bolted shut from the outside with rusted iron brackets. No record of it existed on any architectural plans, and inside, when pried open, was a narrow, spiraling staircase that descended into pitch blackness. One of the crew, 32-year-old Kevin Lamont, volunteered to go down. He made it 17 steps before he stopped and called out, not for help, but something worse. "Who's humming?" Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because what Kevin found underground still hasn't been explained, and if you live near forest ruins, you need to hear this. Kevin's flashlight started flickering, so they tossed him a backup. He caught it, then went silent. 10 full minutes passed. No movement, no sound. Then Kevin climbed back up, slowly, mechanically, and when he emerged, the team said he looked different. His pupils were wide, like someone drugged, his hands were trembling, and there was a single bite mark on the side of his neck, small, human, and child-sized. He never went back to work. 2 weeks later, his fiancée found him standing in the backyard at 3 a.m., barefoot in the rain, whispering to the trees. Over and over he repeated the same phrase: "The ones who stayed behind aren't dead, they're kept." When she asked what he meant, he smiled and replied, "They can't climb out, but they can still be heard." Kevin was later committed to a psychiatric hospital in Montpelier. He stopped speaking altogether, except for one sentence he scrawled repeatedly in crayon on the walls of his room, sometimes in reverse: "She rings the bell when she's ready to feed." The hospital burned down in 2006. Official cause: faulty breaker box. No bodies were ever recovered. But near the ashes they found a charred iron bracket, same shape, same age, same as the ones used to seal the hatch. There was no staircase in the hospital, but deep under its foundation they discovered an air shaft leading somewhere. Direction unknown, depth unknown. And from inside it, a faint metallic sound. Ding. They say trauma echoes through architecture, but what happens when the walls themselves are built for silence? In 1886, the year Whispering Pines was abandoned, an anonymous letter was mailed to the Burlington Gazette. No return address, no signature, just 6 pages of careful cursive, smudged in places, as if written by a trembling hand. It began simply: "There were never just orphans in those rooms, we were all experiments." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from. Because if this letter is real, it confirms everything they've tried to bury for over a century. The letter described a secret ward below the main dormitory, a place the staff called the Nest. Only select children were sent there. The writer claimed they were the ones who didn't dream right. He said at night the doctors would come wearing rubber masks and dripping gloves, that they'd place metal caps over their heads and turn dials until their noses bled. They were told it was for science. But when one girl, Josie M., started screaming names of people who hadn't been born yet, they were told to stop. That same night, the Nest was locked shut. Josie disappeared. No explanation. No search. Years later, the same letter says Josie returned, older, unchanged, and furious. Except this time no one could see her. Except the children. She sat at the edge of our beds, the letter claims. She whispered things we didn't understand until we were adults, but by then it was too late. One boy cut out his own tongue, another jumped from the second story and claimed he was trying to follow her back through the mirror. But the most disturbing line of all was this. She told me her body was buried behind the bell tower, but not her. She said her mind was still under the house, being used like a switchboard. Authorities dismissed the letter as a hoax. The Gazette never published it. But years later, that same 6-page document was found taped to the underside of a pew in St. Michael's Church, just 5 miles from the orphanage ruins. The final sentence, written in a different pen, reads, "They've built new buildings over old scars, but the wires still hum. Do you know what hums in silence? Not a machine, not electricity, not the wind. It's memory. It's the echo of something that never wanted to be remembered." In 1923, 37 years after the orphanage was shuttered, a new structure rose from its ashes, the Vermont Center for Behavioral Research. They claimed it was built for veterans for studying shell shock, but the blueprints told another story. Why were there windowless rooms in the basement with no access from inside? Why was the original orphanage foundation left untouched beneath the new concrete? And why, when the center finally opened, were no public tours allowed? Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what we found next is proof they never stopped. They just changed their name. A former janitor, Charles Ledlow, came forward in 1958. He claimed that while cleaning one of the lower maintenance corridors, he found a trapdoor bolted shut and covered in lead paint. Curiosity got the better of him. He pried it open. What he saw? The original stairwell from the orphanage basement, still intact, still leading downward. He took a flashlight, walked 13 steps, and stopped. The walls were marked with hundreds of tiny scratchings, not random. They were names of children, some scratched forward, some backward, some repeated until they became unreadable. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway curved. He turned the corner and was met with a metal door covered in frost, even though it was August. Carved into the center of the door, in what appeared to be fingernail etchings, were 3 words: "Let me finish." He ran, reported it to his supervisor. 2 days later, he was fired for trespassing restricted areas. And a week after that, the entire lower level was accidentally flooded during a pipe burst. But records show no maintenance call, no damage report, no insurance claim, only a purchase order for 7 industrial generators and 24 lead-lined storage crates delivered at midnight. We can't confirm what was in those crates, but what's undeniable is this: whatever was buried beneath Whispering Pines, they kept it alive, not in a physical sense, but in systems, in infrastructure, in doctrine. This wasn't an orphanage. It was a prototype. They called it Whispering Pines. But the pines weren't whispering. They were warning us. All along, this wasn't just an isolated tragedy, not just one cruel chapter in the forgotten woods of Vermont. This was the first draft, the experiment that set the blueprint for an entirely new kind of control, not over land, not over property, but over consciousness itself. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're watching from, because what I'm about to reveal might explain things you felt your whole life but could never name. The children of Whispering Pines were chosen, carefully, deliberately, not just for their vulnerability, but for what they represented. Orphans with no birth certificates, no medical histories, no family ties. In other words, untraceable variables. Every scream, every fear-induced seizure, every sleepless night under that cold iron roof was data, but who was collecting it? Not just local clergy, not just state officials. The evidence points to something much larger. We found correspondence buried in a university archive in upstate New York between Reverend Ellison of Whispering Pines and a man named Dr. Wilfred S. Northam. Northam was a physician, but not a public one. He worked for an organization called the North Atlantic Psychological Commission, a ghost agency, no budget, no employees. But somehow it received funding through the Office of Naval Intelligence 30 years before the CIA existed. In the letters, Ellison reports the resilience threshold of children after exposure to ritualistic auditory sequences and solitude immersion tests. He describes the hollow room, the mirror day protocol, and the effect of symbolic food denial. These weren't just punishments, they were formulas, experiments in breaking identity and rebuilding it under guided suggestion. And now, look around. Mass media, 24-hour screens, whispers of fear, guilt, and isolation turned into algorithmic precision. The prototype worked. What began in 1886 as a home for the abandoned was in fact the birthplace of psychological programming in America. Not just mind control, not just trauma, but the institutionalization of obedience wrapped in the disguise of care. Whispering Pines didn't burn, it evolved. And its roots? They run beneath every facility, every program, every lie they told you about your own free will, because once you understand what they did to those children, you'll start to question what they're doing to us. In 1886, Vermont, the Whispering Pines orphanage was consumed by a mysterious fire. Its children vanished, its records erased, and its history buried. But what if the fire wasn't an accident? What if those children were never meant to be saved? This 33-part psychological deep dive uncovers a horrifying secret hidden behind church walls and state silence. From secret experiments on orphaned children to links with early psychological warfare programs, the truth behind Whispering Pines leads to something far more sinister than forgotten tragedy, a prototype.